Nobody dared to save this dying puppy, except for one man. Everyone else walked away, convinced the little creature had no chance. But when he reached out, what he discovered was darker than anyone imagined. Saving this puppy wasn't just about compassion. It pulled him straight into a dangerous fight against powerful enemies who would do anything to keep their secrets hidden. With his life turned upside down, one question remains. Can one man's courage to save a dying animal uncover the truth? Or cost him everything? Your presence here is powerful. In a world full of noise, it's the quiet gestures of compassion that truly stand out. If your heart still makes room for kindness, you're already one of us. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of the Cedar Grove Animal Shelter, illuminating rows of kennels where dogs of all sizes barked and wagged their tails at passing visitors. But in the last cage at the end of the dim corridor, a small puppy huddled in the corner, trying its best to become invisible. Unlike the other kennels that displayed cheerful descriptions of their occupants, this cage bore a stark red sign that read, "Do not adopt," in bold letters. The puppy, a mastiff mix with patches of missing fur and a network of scars across its small frame, watched the world through wary eyes. Its body trembled whenever someone walked past, and it pressed itself further into the corner as if trying to melt into the cold concrete walls. Sarah Martinez, one of the shelter volunteers, led a young family down the row of kennels. Their 2 children bounced excitedly, pointing at various dogs, but Sarah deliberately steered them away from the last cage. As they passed, she lowered her voice to a whisper that still carried in the quiet corridor. "That one came from a really bad situation," she explained to the parents. "We're not even sure what they did to it, but it's too dangerous to adopt out. Some say it's cursed. It's already scared away 3 families who tried to work with it." The children peered curiously toward the cage, but their mother quickly ushered them along. "Let's look at the golden retriever puppies instead," she suggested brightly, casting a nervous glance over her shoulder. Throughout the day, similar scenes repeated. Families would come through, full of hope and excitement about adopting a new pet, but they'd hurry past the last cage, some making the sign of the cross or muttering about bad omens. The shelter staff had grown used to it. That puppy was a lost cause, they'd decided. Too damaged, too unpredictable. It was late afternoon when Roland Pike walked through the shelter doors. His weathered work boots left dusty prints on the linoleum floor, and his flannel shirt still carried the metallic smell of the factory where he'd just finished his shift. At 45, Roland's face showed the marks of hard work and harder times, with deep creases around his eyes and grey threading through his dark hair. "Can I help you?" asked Sarah, approaching with a clipboard. Roland cleared his throat, his voice rough from disuse. "Looking for a dog," he said simply. He hadn't owned a pet since his wife passed away 3 years ago, and the silence in his small house had finally become too much to bear. "Of course, we have lots of wonderful dogs available." Sarah brightened, already moving to guide him toward the popular kennels. "Are you interested in a particular breed? We just got in some lovely lab mixes." But Roland was already walking slowly down the corridor, taking his time to look at each dog. He nodded politely at Sarah's suggestions, but kept moving, his steady gaze taking in every cage. When he reached the end of the row, he stopped. The puppy in the last cage tried to make itself even smaller, but something in its eyes caught Roland's attention. Where others saw aggression or curse, he recognized a familiar pain, the kind that came from loss and betrayal, from having the world turn its back on you. "What about this one?" he asked quietly. Sarah's cheerful demeanor faltered. "Oh, no, that one's not available for adoption. It came from a fighting ring, we think, used as bait to train the fighting dogs. It's too unpredictable, too damaged. We have many other wonderful dogs that would make perfect pets." Roland stepped closer to the cage, ignoring Sarah's sharp intake of breath. The puppy watched him with those wounded eyes, trembling, but not retreating further into its corner. For a moment, neither moved. "Sir, please," Sarah insisted. "That dog is dangerous. It's already shown aggressive tendencies. We can't in good conscience allow anyone to adopt it." Roland turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. Aggressive or afraid? "What's the difference when it comes to a dog like that?" Sarah argued. "It's been through too much. Some animals can't be saved." "Everything deserves a chance," Roland said softly, more to himself than to Sarah. He crouched down slowly, keeping his movements gentle as he addressed the puppy directly. "You've had it rough, haven't you, little one?" The puppy's ears twitched slightly at the gentleness in his voice, though it maintained its defensive posture. "Mr. Pike, please." Sarah tried again. "We have so many other dogs that would be perfect for you. Dogs without complications." Roland stood up slowly, his mind made up. "I'd like to adopt this one." Sarah's clipboard clattered to the floor. That's not possible. The shelter manager would never approve it. That dog is marked as unadoptable for a reason." "Then I'd like to speak to the manager," Roland said firmly. What followed was 2 hours of intense discussion, warnings, and attempted persuasion. The shelter manager, a stern woman named Patricia Collins, tried everything to talk Roland out of his decision. She showed him incident reports, explained the liability issues, and even brought up the whispered rumors about the dog's cursed nature. Roland listened patiently to it all, his weathered hands clasped in his lap, then said simply, "I still want to adopt the puppy." "Mr. Pike." Patricia leaned forward across her desk. "I need you to understand what you're getting into. This isn't just about giving a home to a needy animal. This dog has serious issues. It's been through trauma we can't even fully understand. It could be dangerous." "I understand." Roland nodded. "But I see something in those eyes. Not danger. Pain. And pain. I know something about—" Patricia studied him for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "You'll need to sign additional waivers, and if anything happens, any aggressive incidents at all, you'll have to return the dog immediately." "Agreed?" Roland said without hesitation. The paperwork took another hour. Sarah hovered nervously as Roland signed form after form, her expression a mixture of concern and disbelief. Other shelter workers gathered at the office door, whispering among themselves about the man crazy enough to adopt the cursed puppy. Finally, it was time. Roland followed Sarah back to the last cage, where the puppy watched their approach with familiar wariness. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she unlocked the cage door. "Be careful," she warned. "Don't make any sudden moves." Roland moved with deliberate slowness, keeping his voice soft and steady. "It's okay, little one. No one's going to hurt you anymore." The puppy pressed itself against the back wall, trembling violently now. Roland didn't reach for it or try to force it out. Instead, he sat down on the floor, ignoring the dirt and concrete dust that clung to his work jeans. "Take your time," he murmured. "We've got all day." Minutes ticked by. Sarah fidgeted nervously, but Roland remained perfectly still, his presence calm and patient. Gradually, the puppy's trembling lessened. Its nose twitched, catching Roland's scent. With painstaking slowness, it took one tiny step forward, then another. Roland kept talking quietly, his voice a gentle rumble that seemed to ease some of the tension from the puppy's scarred body. "That's it. You're being very brave. No one's going to rush you." After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, the puppy had inched its way to within a few feet of Roland. It still shook, still watched him with desperate wariness. But something had changed in its eyes. A tiny spark of possibility, perhaps, or the first fragile thread of trust. When Roland finally left the shelter that evening, the puppy was cradled carefully in his arms, wrapped in an old blanket the shelter had provided. The staff watched him go with a mixture of amazement and concern, their whispers following him out the door. "He's made a terrible mistake. That dog will never be normal. He'll bring it back within a week." But Roland didn't hear them. He was focused entirely on the small, trembling bundle in his arms, on the rapid heartbeat he could feel through the blanket, on the enormous responsibility he had just undertaken. "We'll figure this out together," he promised softly as he carried the puppy to his truck. "One day at a time." The puppy didn't respond, but it didn't try to bite or escape either. As Roland carefully settled it into the passenger seat, he caught a glimpse of those eyes again. Still frightened, still damaged, but perhaps holding the tiniest glimmer of hope. The sun was setting as Roland's truck pulled out of the shelter parking lot, casting long shadows across the pavement. Inside the shelter, Sarah watched them go, shaking her head in wonder and worry. "I hope you know what you're doing, Mr. Pike," she whispered to the empty air. "I really hope you know what you're doing." Roland Pike's ancient pickup truck rumbled down the gravel driveway to his modest farmhouse, the passenger seat occupied by a cardboard carrier that occasionally shifted with nervous movement. He glanced over at the box, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. The shelter staff's warnings still echoed in his mind, but something about those frightened eyes had called to him. "Almost home, little one," he said softly, his deep voice gentle despite its natural gruffness. The only response was a slight whimper from inside the carrier. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his small property as Roland parked beside his weather-beaten porch. The house wasn't much, white paint peeling in places, screen door slightly askew, but it was home. He carefully lifted the carrier and made his way inside, his work boots creaking against the wooden steps. Inside, Roland had prepared a corner of the living room with a soft bed, water bowl, and some toys he'd purchased on his way home. He set the carrier down and slowly opened its door, then stepped back to give the puppy space. Minutes ticked by with no movement. "Take your time," Roland murmured, settling into his worn armchair nearby. "No rush." Finally, a small nose poked out, followed by cautious eyes. The puppy emerged inch by inch, its scarred body trembling. Roland's heart ached at the sight of the marks that marred its young frame. Evidence of cruelty he couldn't begin to understand. The pup was small for what the shelter guessed was 4 months old, its growth likely stunted by neglect. The puppy darted under the coffee table, pressing itself against the wall. Roland noticed how its eyes never left him, watching his every movement with a mixture of fear and resignation. He slowly reached for the bag of premium puppy food he'd bought, pouring some into a bowl. The sound made the pup flinch violently. "Just some dinner," Roland said, keeping his voice low and steady. He placed the bowl near the table, but not too close, then returned to his chair. Hours passed. The food remained untouched. The water bowl sat undisturbed. Roland maintained his quiet vigil, occasionally reading his newspaper or watching the evening news at low volume. As darkness fell, he turned on a small lamp instead of the harsh overhead light. A sharp knock at the door sent the puppy scrambling further into its corner, trembling uncontrollably. Roland opened the door to find his neighbor, Martha Wilson, standing there with her signature look of concern. "Roland Pike, tell me it isn't true," she said, peering past him into the house. "Sarah at the grocery store said you adopted that cursed dog from the shelter. The one they warned everyone about?" Roland shifted his weight, blocking her view. "Martha, I appreciate the concern, but that dog's dangerous, Roland. Everyone knows it. Attacked 3 families during home visits, they say. Cursed, that's what it is. You living alone here, you need to think about your safety." The puppy's trembling was visible even from across the room. Roland's jaw tightened slightly. "Thank you for stopping by, Martha. Have a good evening." He closed the door firmly but politely, though he could hear her continued protests as she walked away. Returning to his chair, Roland sighed heavily. The puppy's eyes seemed to hold a question, as if waiting to see what he would do now that he'd been warned yet again. "Don't you worry about Martha," he told it softly. "She means well, but she doesn't know you like I'm going to." Night fell completely. Roland prepared for bed, leaving the puppy's food and water where they were. He placed an old blanket near the coffee table, then headed to his bedroom, leaving the hall light on and his door open so the pup wouldn't be in complete darkness. Sleep came fitfully. Every small noise had Roland wondering if the puppy was okay. Around 2 a.m, he heard a quiet whimper followed by the sound of movement. Keeping still, he listened as tiny paws carefully explored the house. The water bowl made a slight sound, the first drink all day. Then more movement, closer now. Roland kept his breathing steady, feigning sleep. A presence approached his bedroom doorway, hesitant and cautious. More waiting. Then, ever so slowly, the soft padding of paws across his bedroom floor. The puppy settled somewhere near his bed, not touching it, but closer than it had been all day. A small smile crossed Roland's face, but he didn't move or acknowledge the moment. This fragile trust was too precious to disturb. The puppy's breathing eventually settled into a steady rhythm, and for the first time since arriving, it seemed to truly rest. The next morning brought new challenges. The puppy startled at the coffee maker's gurgle, the toaster's pop, the phone's ring. Each sudden noise sent it scrambling for cover, its body shaking with fear. The food bowl remained untouched, though Roland noticed the water level had dropped slightly. Mrs. Henderson from next door came by with her usual morning walk past his house, slowing when she saw Roland on the porch. The puppy had retreated to its spot under the coffee table at the sound of approaching footsteps. "Roland," she called out, keeping her distance. "I heard about your new guest. Are you sure you've thought this through? That dog's got a reputation." Roland leaned against his porch railing. "Every dog deserves a chance, Mrs. Henderson. Not this one, from what I hear. It's not natural, how it acts. And those scars, something's wrong with it, mark my words." Through the window, Roland could see the puppy watching, its eyes reflecting a familiar pain, the pain of being judged, feared, written off as hopeless. He straightened up, his voice firm but kind. "Have a good day, Mrs. Henderson." Throughout the day, Roland maintained a quiet routine. He moved slowly, spoke softly, and never forced interaction. He changed the food, placing the bowl a little closer to the coffee table. He read aloud sometimes, just simple stories from the newspaper, letting the puppy get used to his voice. By evening, exhaustion showed in every line of Roland's face. Doubt crept in with the shadows. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe he was foolish to think he could help this traumatized animal. Maybe Dash. A slight movement caught his eye. The puppy had crept out from under the coffee table while he was lost in thought. It stood there, trembling but present, looking at him with those eyes that had first captured his heart at the shelter. Slowly, so slowly, it took a step toward him. Then another. It settled onto the floor near his feet, not touching, but close enough that Roland could feel its warmth. Roland's throat tightened with emotion. He kept perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. The puppy's eyes met his, and for the first time, the fear in them was mixed with something else, a tiny spark of hope. "We'll figure this out together," Roland whispered, his voice rough with feeling. "You and me. We've got all the time in the world." The puppy's tail moved slightly. Not quite a wag, but no longer tucked tight against its body. It was a small change, but to Roland it felt like a miracle. In that moment, watching the scarred little dog choose to trust him despite its terror, Roland's determination solidified. He would prove them all wrong, not for his sake, but for this brave soul who had taken the first step toward healing. The autumn days grew shorter, and Roland Pike noticed subtle changes in both the puppy and their surroundings. After 2 weeks of patient coaxing, the scared animal had finally begun eating regularly, though it still startled at sudden movements and loud noises. Roland had taken to calling the pup Shadow, not because of its dark fur, but because it had begun following him at a careful distance whenever he moved around the house. One crisp Monday morning, as Roland sipped his coffee on the front porch, he noticed an unfamiliar black sedan parked at the end of his long driveway. 2 men in dark suits sat inside, seemingly watching his property. His weathered hands tightened around the coffee mug as unease settled in his stomach. When he stood up to get a better look, the car pulled away smoothly, leaving only a trail of dust on the gravel road. Probably lost, Roland muttered to himself, but something about their presence bothered him. Shadow, who had been cautiously exploring the porch, immediately retreated inside at his tension. The next day, Roland spotted a different vehicle, a dark SUV with tinted windows, parked across the street. The men inside didn't even pretend to be doing anything else. They stared directly at his house. This time, Roland walked toward them, his work boots crunching on the gravel. Before he could reach them, the SUV's engine roared to life, and it sped away. That evening, as Roland prepared Shadow's dinner, he heard a distinct scratching sound from outside. Shadow's ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled in the pup's throat. The first aggressive sound Roland had heard from the usually timid dog. Roland peered through the kitchen window, but saw only darkness beyond the yellow porch light's reach. "Stay here," he told Shadow softly, grabbing his flashlight from the drawer. The puppy whimpered as Roland stepped outside. The beam of light swept across his yard, catching movement near his storage shed. The padlock on the door hung open, swinging slightly in the evening breeze. Roland's heart pounded as he approached carefully. The door stood ajar, tools scattered across the floor inside. Someone had definitely been searching for something. Roland did a quick inventory. Nothing seemed to be missing, but everything had been moved, examined, and carelessly tossed aside. His old toolbox lay upended, its contents spilled across his workbench. Even the stack of newspapers he'd been meaning to recycle had been torn apart. Back inside, Roland double-checked all his doors and windows. Shadow stayed close to his heels, unusually alert. The puppy's behavior had shifted from fearful to watchful, as if it recognized something in the air that Roland couldn't quite grasp. The next morning, Roland called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years. Something wasn't right, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it had everything to do with the mysterious puppy he'd adopted. He spent the morning installing new locks on his doors and making sure all his windows were secure. Around noon, Shadow finally allowed Roland to approach. Close enough to check the healing wounds that marked its small body. As Roland gently ran his hands through the puppy's fur, checking for signs of infection, his fingers brushed against something hard near the dog's shoulder blade. Shadow tensed but didn't pull away, another small sign of the trust they'd been building. Carefully parting the fur, Roland discovered a tiny metal object embedded just beneath the skin. No bigger than a grain of rice, its smooth surface caught the light in a way that seemed distinctly artificial. A tracking device. Roland's blood ran cold. This wasn't some stray that had been abused by a cruel owner. The professional surveillance, the break-in, and now this electronic tracker. It all pointed to something much more sinister. Shadow wasn't just an unwanted puppy. It was something valuable enough that people were trying to find it. He examined the device more closely, careful not to disturb it. Questions raced through his mind. Who would put a tracker in a puppy? Why had they let it end up in a shelter? And most importantly, what would they do to get it back? Shadow looked up at him with those knowing eyes, and Roland saw something there he hadn't noticed before. Not just fear of abuse, but fear of capture. The puppy had been running from something, and now that something had tracked them both down, Roland's living room suddenly felt exposed. He moved away from the windows, drawing the curtains closed. Shadow followed, pressing against his leg in an unprecedented display of trust. The small gesture strengthened Roland's resolve. Whatever Shadow was running from, whatever darkness lay in the puppy's past, Roland knew one thing for certain. He would protect this dog with everything he had. He sat down heavily in his armchair, Shadow settling cautiously at his feet. The tracker changed everything. It explained the shelter's warnings, the curse everyone spoke of. Someone dangerous wanted this puppy back, and they now knew exactly where to find it. Roland reached down to scratch behind Shadow's ears, his mind racing through possibilities. The puppy leaned into his touch for the first time, and in that moment, Roland made his decision. He wouldn't let them take Shadow back. Whatever it took, he would keep this dog safe. The rest of the afternoon passed in tense vigilance. Roland observed more unfamiliar vehicles driving slowly past his house. Men in dark clothes walked by, pretending to be interested in neighboring properties. They were watching, waiting, planning something. Each passing hour brought a heightened sense of danger. As evening approached, Roland prepared Shadow's dinner with shaking hands. The simple act of caring for the puppy had become an act of defiance against unknown forces that lurked in the shadows. Shadow ate quickly, as if sensing the need to stay alert. Roland knew he needed help, but who could he trust? The shelter hadn't known or hadn't told him about Shadow's true situation. The police would want evidence of wrongdoing beyond mysterious cars and a break-in where nothing was stolen. He was on his own, at least for now. The setting sun cast long shadows through the gaps in his curtains. Roland checked his new locks again, then settled into his chair with Shadow nearby. They would face whatever came next together. The puppy's past was darker than he could have imagined, but its future, their future, was something worth fighting for. As darkness fell completely, Roland listened to every creak and groan of his old house, trying to distinguish normal settling sounds from potential threats. Shadow's ears remained perked, tracking sounds Roland couldn't hear. The tracker in the puppy's shoulder was a constant reminder that they were being watched, hunted, waiting for whoever would come to claim what they believed was theirs. But they had underestimated both Roland Pike and the bond he'd formed with this supposedly cursed dog. Shadow wasn't just some piece of property to be claimed. It was a living being that had chosen to trust him despite all the cruelty it had endured. And Roland would honor that trust no matter what dangers lay ahead. Chapter 3. Scene 2. The revelation hit Roland like a physical blow. He sat at his kitchen table, hands trembling as he read through the newspaper clippings and police reports he'd gathered over the past week. The puppy lay curled at his feet, pressing against his work boots as if seeking comfort. "So that's what they did to you," Roland whispered, his voice rough with emotion. The articles detailed a series of raids on illegal dog-fighting operations in neighboring counties. His stomach churned as he read about bait dogs, smaller, weaker animals used to train fighting dogs, disposable victims in a cruel system. The puppy's scars told the story. The jagged marks across its muzzle, the torn ears, the way it flinched at sudden movements. It all made horrible sense now. This wasn't some cursed, aggressive animal. This was a survivor. Roland reached down to stroke the puppy's head, moving slowly so as not to startle it. "You're safe now," he murmured. "Nobody's going to hurt you again." As if understanding his words, the puppy pressed closer, releasing a soft whine. Over the past weeks, they'd developed a careful routine. The puppy still struggled with food, eating only when Roland sat nearby, speaking in gentle tones. Loud noises sent it scrambling for cover, but it had begun seeking Roland out during these moments of fear rather than hiding alone. The tracker he'd found hidden in the puppy's fur lay on the table, a small black device that confirmed his worst suspicions. Someone had been monitoring the puppy's movements, waiting and watching. The thought made Roland's jaw clench. A sharp knock at the front door shattered the quiet moment. The puppy jerked awake, scrambling behind Roland's legs with a frightened whimper. Through the window, Roland could see two men standing on his porch, both wearing dark jackets despite the warm afternoon. "Mr. Pike," one called out, "we need to speak with you about that dog." Roland's heart pounded, but his voice remained steady. "Not interested in talking. I'm afraid we must insist." The tone shifted, harder now. "That animal is property of our organization. There's been a misunderstanding with its placement in the shelter." "No misunderstanding," Roland replied. "I adopted him legally. I've got the paperwork." A laugh, ugly and sharp. "Paperwork doesn't matter much here, Mr. Pike. That dog belongs to us. We can make this easy or difficult, your choice." Roland looked down at the puppy trembling against his legs, seeing the terror in its eyes. The same terror that must have filled them during those brutal training sessions. His hands clenched into fists. "Get off my property," he said, each word clear and firm. "Now." "Wrong choice." The man's voice dropped to a threatening whisper. "We'll be seeing you again real soon, Mr. Pike. Hope you've got good insurance." Heavy footsteps retreated down the porch steps. Roland waited until he heard car doors slam and an engine start before moving to the window. He watched the black sedan pull away, memorizing the license plate, even though he suspected it was probably stolen. The puppy whined softly, and Roland knelt beside it. "It's okay, buddy. We're in this together now." He ran his hand gently along the puppy's scarred back, feeling the way it leaned into his touch. "They're not getting you back. I promise." That night, Roland brought the puppy's bed into his room instead of leaving it in the kitchen. He lay awake for hours, listening to every creak and rustle, one hand resting near the baseball bat he'd propped against the nightstand. The puppy slept fitfully, twitching and whimpering with nightmares. Morning brought new worries. Roland's truck had 4 slashed tires, and someone had spray-painted "Last Warning" across his garage door. The message was clear. They weren't going to give up easily. At work, Roland couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting to the puppy alone at home. Vulnerable. He'd locked all the doors and windows. But would that be enough? During his lunch break, he called the local police, but they seemed uninterested in his concerns. "Unless there's actual violence, sir, there's not much we can do," the dispatcher told him. "Property disputes over pets are civil matters." "This isn't a property dispute," Roland argued. "These people were involved in illegal dog fighting. The puppy was used as bait. Do you have proof of these allegations?" Roland's frustration mounted. "I've got newspaper articles about the raids and the puppy's injuries." "That's circumstantial, sir. If you're concerned about threats, you can file a report, but without concrete evidence." The dispatcher's voice trailed off meaningfully. Roland hung up, understanding the message. He was on his own. That evening he drove home, taking a circuitous route, watching his mirrors for any signs of being followed. The puppy greeted him at the door with cautious tail wags, a new development that usually filled Roland with joy. Today it just reminded him of how far they'd come and how much they stood to lose. As he prepared their dinner, hamburger mixed with kibble for the puppy, a sandwich for himself, Roland considered his options. He could try to find somewhere else to live, but moving would be expensive, and there was no guarantee they wouldn't be found again. He could get security cameras, reinforce the doors, but that felt like a temporary solution at best. The puppy watched him from its spot near the refrigerator, head tilted as if trying to read his thoughts. Its ears, mangled from its fighting days, twitched at every sound from outside. "We're not running," Roland said firmly, more to himself than the dog. "You've done enough running." He thought about his late wife, Margaret, and what she would say about all this. She'd always been the brave one, standing up to bullies and injustice while Roland preferred to keep his head down. But she'd also taught him that some things were worth fighting for. The puppy's warm weight pressed against his leg, grounding him in the present moment. Those men might have seen the dog as property, a tool for their cruel entertainment. But Roland saw something else. He saw intelligence in those wary eyes, courage in the way it faced each day despite its trauma, and most importantly, trust, hard-won and precious. Late that night, as Roland sat in his darkened living room with the puppy dozing beside him, he made his decision. He wouldn't let fear rule them. Tomorrow he'd start gathering evidence, photographs of the puppy's injuries, documentation of the threats, anything that might help build a case. He'd find someone who would listen, someone who could help stop these people before they hurt any more animals. The puppy stirred in its sleep, paws twitching. Roland wondered what it dreamed about. The violence of its past, or maybe, hopefully, the safety of its present. Either way, he'd made a promise when he'd adopted this scarred, frightened creature, to protect it, to give it a chance at a better life. "We're going to be okay," he whispered, gently stroking the puppy's head. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Outside, a car drove slowly past the house, its headlights sweeping across the windows. Roland remained still, watching until the vehicle disappeared into the night. The threat hadn't passed. In many ways, it was just beginning. But for the first time since discovering the tracker, he felt something besides fear. He felt ready. Roland sat in the sterile waiting room of the local veterinary clinic, his hands clasped tightly together. The scarred puppy lay curled against his leg, trembling slightly but staying close. The familiar smell of antiseptic and pet shampoo filled the air, while the quiet murmur of voices and occasional bark echoed from deeper within the building. "Mr. Pike?" A warm, steady voice called his name. Roland looked up to see Dr. Claire Donnelly standing in the doorway, her professional white coat crisp and neat. Her clear eyes held both kindness and curiosity as she took in the sight of the notorious, cursed puppy everyone in town had been whispering about. "That's me," Roland said, standing carefully so as not to startle the pup. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice." Claire's expression softened as she watched the gentle way Roland guided the nervous dog. "Of course. Please, come on back." She held the door open, maintaining a careful distance that showed her experience with traumatized animals. Inside the examination room, Roland lifted the puppy onto the metal table, keeping one hand steadily on its back for comfort. The fluorescent lights highlighted every scar that marked the young dog's body, telling a story of cruelty that made Roland's jaw clench. "So this is the little one everyone's been talking about," Claire said softly, moving slowly as she approached. She didn't reach out to touch the puppy right away, instead letting it observe her. "What made you decide to adopt him?" Roland cleared his throat. "Couldn't leave him there. Everyone else just saw danger, but I saw something different in his eyes." He paused, wondering if he sounded foolish, but Claire was nodding thoughtfully. "Mind if I take a closer look?" she asked, already reaching for her stethoscope. At Roland's nod, she began a gentle examination, speaking in low, soothing tones to the puppy throughout. "He's remarkably calm with you nearby. That shows real trust." The examination continued, Claire's experienced hands moving carefully over each scar and old injury. She made detailed notes, photographed the marking patterns, and took measurements. "He's a Mastiff mix, probably with some Shepherd in there too. Good breeds, intelligent and loyal when treated right." She looked up at Roland, her expression serious. "These aren't random injuries. The pattern suggests systematic abuse, consistent with what we see in dogfighting operations. He was likely used as a bait dog." Roland's stomach turned. "That's what I was afraid of. Found a tracker hidden in his fur yesterday." Claire's eyes widened slightly, but her voice remained steady. "Did you keep it?" "Yeah, wrapped it up and put it in my garage. Figured it might be evidence." "Smart thinking." Claire continued her examination, documenting everything with methodical precision. "I'm going to write up a detailed report. These injuries, their pattern and age, it all tells a story that could help build a case." She glanced at Roland. "You might need it, especially if someone comes looking for him." "They already have," Roland admitted quietly. "Had some men show up at my place, demanding I hand him over." Claire straightened up, her expression hardening. "Did you report it?" "Wouldn't know where to start. Besides, most folks in town think I'm crazy for keeping him. They'd probably say I brought it on myself." "Well, they're wrong," Claire said firmly. She reached for her camera again, taking more detailed photos of specific scars. "This puppy isn't cursed or dangerous. He's a survivor, and he's chosen to trust you. That says a lot about both of you." As if understanding her words, the puppy pressed closer to Roland's hand. Claire smiled at the gesture, then turned serious again. "I'm going to be honest with you, Mr. Pike. What I'm seeing here suggests involvement in organized criminal activity. These people typically don't just walk away when they lose an animal." Roland nodded grimly. "I figured as much, but I can't give him back. Not now." "No, you can't." Claire agreed. She began typing rapidly on her computer. "I'm documenting everything. Every scar, every old break, every sign of malnutrition and abuse. If anyone tries to claim this dog was legally theirs, This evidence will tell a different story." For the next hour, Claire worked diligently, creating a thorough record of the puppy's condition. She drew blood for tests, checked for microchips, and compiled a comprehensive medical history based on what she could observe. Throughout it all, Roland stood by the table, his steady presence keeping the puppy calm despite the unfamiliar procedures. "You know," Claire said as she finished her notes, "most people wouldn't have done what you did. Taking in a dog with his reputation, standing up to threats. It takes courage." Roland shifted uncomfortably at the praise. Just seemed like the right thing to do. "It was—" Claire smiled, then hesitated before continuing. "Listen, I know the local police might not be much help, but I have contacts with animal welfare organizations. People who deal with cases like this. Would you be willing to let me reach out to them?" Roland considered this, watching as the puppy dozed against his hand, finally relaxed enough to rest. "Yeah," he said finally. "Yeah, I think that would be good." Claire nodded, relief visible in her expression. "I'll make some calls today. In the meantime, I'm giving you my personal number. Any problems, any concerns, you call me, day or night." As she wrote her number on a card, Roland felt a weight lift slightly from his shoulders. For the first time since finding the tracker, he didn't feel completely alone in this fight. The puppy stirred, lifting its head to look at Claire. Slowly, cautiously, it stretched its neck out toward her. Claire remained perfectly still as the dog sniffed her hand, then gave it a tiny lick. "Well, look at that," she said softly, her eyes bright. "He's got good instincts about people, just like his new owner." Roland felt his face warm at the comment, but before he could respond, the bell above the clinic's front door chimed. Voices filled the waiting room, and Roland recognized them, neighbors who had been particularly vocal about his decision to keep the dangerous dog. Claire noticed his tension. "There's a back exit through my office," she said quietly. "Give me a minute to clear the hall, and you can slip out that way. No need to deal with gossip today." As she stepped out to check the corridor, Roland looked down at the puppy, who was watching him with those trust-filled eyes that had first caught his attention at the shelter. "We've got a friend now," he murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. "A good one." Claire returned, gesturing them toward her office. "Coast is clear. I'll call you tomorrow about those contacts, Mr. Pike. And remember what I said. Any concerns, you call me." "Roland," he corrected, carefully lifting the puppy. "Call me Roland." She smiled, warm and genuine. "Roland it is. Take care of each other." As Roland drove home, the puppy sleeping peacefully in the passenger seat, he thought about Claire's words. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still threats to face and battles to fight. But having someone believe in him, someone who saw past the rumors and fear to the truth of the situation, made all the difference. The sun was setting as they pulled into his driveway, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Roland glanced at his sleeping companion, noting how the peaceful expression on the puppy's face contrasted sharply with the scars that marked its body. Claire had been right. They were both survivors, finding strength in each other's trust. Inside, as Roland settled into his evening routine, he placed Claire's card carefully on his refrigerator, right where he could see it. The puppy padded after him, staying close as always, but there was a new lightness in its step. Maybe it sensed the shift too, the knowledge that they weren't facing this challenge alone anymore. The autumn chill bit through Roland's worn jacket as he walked across the factory parking lot after his late shift. Streetlights cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, and his footsteps echoed in the empty space. His thoughts were already home with the puppy, wondering if it had eaten the dinner he'd left out. The attack came without warning. A heavy blow struck the back of his head, sending him stumbling forward. Before he could regain his balance, rough hands grabbed his shoulders and threw him against a parked car. Pain exploded across his ribs as fists connected again and again. "Should have given up the dog when you had the chance!" A gruff voice snarled. Roland tried to fight back, but there were three of them. Dark figures moving with practiced violence. One held him, while the others worked him over methodically. Through the haze of pain, he recognized them as the same men who had confronted him about returning the puppy. "Last warning," another voice said. "Get rid of it, or next time will be worse." They left him slumped against the car, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Blood trickled from his split lip, and every movement sent daggers of pain through his ribs. It took him several minutes to pull himself up, using the car for support. Somehow he made it home. The puppy greeted him at the door with worried whines, pressing against his legs as he stumbled inside. Roland sank onto his couch, wincing as he assessed the damage. Nothing seemed broken, but he'd be feeling this for weeks. "I'm okay, boy," he murmured as the puppy laid its head on his knee, brown eyes full of concern. "We're okay." But they weren't okay. This was just the beginning. 2 days later, Roland returned from a quick grocery run to find his front door kicked in. The house had been ransacked, furniture overturned, drawers emptied, walls marked with threatening messages. The puppy was hiding under his bed, trembling but unharmed. Roland called Claire immediately, his hands shaking as he dialed her number. "They broke in," he said when she answered. "Tore the place apart." "I'm coming over," Claire replied without hesitation. "Have you called the police?" "They're on their way." The local police took statements but offered little hope. "Not much we can do without proof," the officer said, barely hiding his skepticism about Roland's story. "Maybe consider giving the dog up." "Seems like more trouble than it's worth." Claire arrived as the police were leaving. She took one look at Roland's battered face and the destruction around them, her expression hardening with determination. "You're not staying here tonight," she declared. "Pack some things. You're coming to my place." Roland started to protest, but she cut him off. "This isn't just about property damage anymore. They're escalating. You need somewhere safe while we figure this out." He knew she was right, but something made him hesitate. "I can't leave. This is my home." "It's not safe," Claire insisted. "Please, Roland, just for a few days." Before he could respond, the puppy's urgent barking cut through their conversation. Smoke was seeping under the front door, and orange flames flickered through the windows. "Get out!" Roland shouted, pushing Claire toward the back door. "Go!" But the puppy had bolted upstairs, terrified by the chaos. Without thinking, Roland ran after it, ignoring Claire's screams for him to come back. Smoke filled the upper floor, burning his eyes and lungs as he crawled toward his bedroom. "Where are you, boy?" he called between coughs. "Come on." He found the puppy huddled in the corner, paralyzed with fear. As Roland reached for it, part of the ceiling collapsed behind them, sending sparks and burning debris across the room. The stairs were already engulfed in flames. Roland scooped up the trembling dog, tucking it against his chest. There was only one way out now. He kicked open the window, gasping as fresh air rushed in. The ground looked impossibly far away, but he could hear the crackle of flames getting closer. "Hold on," he whispered to the puppy. "Just hold on." There was a small roof over the back porch below his window. If he could reach it, they might have a chance. Roland climbed out onto the windowsill, the puppy clinging to him with desperate trust. Smoke billowed around them as he lowered himself down, feeling for any handhold. His fingers slipped, and for a heart-stopping moment they were falling. Then his feet hit the porch roof hard, sending shockwaves of pain up his legs. The puppy yelped but held on as Roland scrambled down to the edge. Claire was there, reaching up to help them. Together they half fell, half jumped the remaining distance to the ground. Roland's legs buckled as they landed, but he kept his grip on the puppy, rolling to protect it from impact. They crawled away from the house just as the upper floor collapsed in a shower of sparks and burning timber. Roland held the puppy close, feeling its rapid heartbeat against his chest as they watched their home become an inferno. Fire trucks wailed in the distance, but it was already too late to save the house. "You could have died," Claire said, her voice shaking. "Both of you could have died." Roland looked down at the puppy, which was pressed against him, still trembling but alive. Despite everything, the beating, the break-in, the fire, he knew he'd make the same choice again. This dog, marked as dangerous and unwanted, had become his reason to keep fighting. "We're still here," he said quietly, scratching behind the puppy's ears. "That's what matters." Claire wrapped a blanket around his shoulders as emergency vehicles filled the street. The puppy stayed glued to Roland's side, watching the flames with wide eyes that reflected the dancing light. They had lost their home, but in those terrifying moments in the burning house, their bond had been forged even stronger. Neighbors gathered to watch the firefighters work, their faces illuminated by the flames. Roland heard their whispers, saw their pointing fingers, but none of it mattered. He and the puppy had survived, and no amount of violence or intimidation could break the trust between them now. As dawn broke over the smoldering ruins of his house, Roland sat in Claire's car, the puppy finally sleeping in his lap. Every breath hurt, his body aching from both the beating and their escape, but a quiet determination had settled over him. They had tried to kill him, to kill them both, but instead had only proved how far he would go to protect this dog that everyone else had given up on. "We'll find them," Claire promised as she drove them to her house. "The people who did this? They won't get away with it." Roland nodded, gently stroking the puppy's scarred head. They had survived fire and violence, but the fight wasn't over. Something told him it was just beginning. The sun rose higher, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Roland watched it through the car window, holding his sleeping companion close. They were alive, they were together, and for now, that was enough. The autumn chill bit through Roland's worn jacket as he walked across the factory parking lot after his late shift. Streetlights cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, and his footsteps echoed in the empty lot. His muscles ached from another long day at work, but his mind was elsewhere, dwelling on the growing threats surrounding him and the pup. Two burly men emerged from behind a pickup truck. Roland's heart jumped, but before he could react, a fist connected with his jaw. He stumbled backward, his lunch pail clattering to the ground. The second man grabbed him from behind, pinning his arms. "Last warning," the first man growled, delivering a punch to Roland's stomach that knocked the wind from his lungs. "Get rid of the dog, or next time will be worse." They left him doubled over in the parking lot, gasping for air. Blood trickled from his split lip, and his ribs screamed in protest as he slowly straightened up. The message was clear. They weren't going to stop. When Roland finally made it home, the pup greeted him with worried whimpers, pressing against his legs. "It's okay, boy," he muttered, though his voice trembled. "We're okay." But they weren't okay. Roland spent a sleepless night pacing his small living room, jumping at every sound outside. The pup stayed close, those intelligent eyes following his every move. By morning, exhaustion and fear had taken their toll. Claire arrived early, carrying coffee and concern in equal measure. When she saw Roland's bruised face, she set the cups down with a sharp intake of breath. "Who did this to you?" "Vernon Clary's men, I'm guessing." Roland sank into his kitchen chair, wincing. "I can't keep doing this, Claire. They're not going to stop. Maybe I should just give up." "Give up?" Claire's voice rose with indignation. "And let them win? Let them keep hurting innocent animals? What choice do I have?" Roland gestured helplessly around his modest home. "I'm just a factory worker. They could kill me, Claire. Or worse, they could hurt you or someone else because of me." The pup padded over, resting his head on Roland's knee. Those eyes that had once held only fear now showed unwavering loyalty. Claire knelt beside them both, her hand gentle on Roland's arm. "You're not alone in this fight anymore," she said firmly. "We have evidence. We have proof of what they're doing. We just need to gather more and take it to the right people." Roland looked down at the pup, remembering the tracker they'd found, the scars that told stories of unimaginable cruelty. "Vernon Clary has half the county in his pocket. Who's going to believe us?" "Then we'll make them believe." Claire pulled out her phone, showing Roland photos she'd taken. Detailed documentation of the pup's injuries, medical records proving systematic abuse. I've been building a case, and I'm not the only one who's noticed things over the years. Other vets, former employees, people who've lost their own dogs, they're willing to talk now that someone's finally standing up to Clary. Hope flickered in Roland's chest, but fear still gripped him. It's dangerous, Claire. These people, they're capable of anything. As if in response to the defeat in Roland's voice, the pup pressed closer, a low, protective growl rumbling in his chest. Claire smiled. Look at him. He's not giving up. He knows you're worth fighting for. Over the next few hours, Claire laid out her plan. She'd been quietly gathering witness statements, connecting with animal rights advocates, and documenting everything. Former workers from Clary's ranch had seen the fighting rings. Missing pet reports formed a pattern around his properties. The evidence was there. It just needed someone brave enough to bring it all together. We start with the local media, Claire explained, spreading papers across Roland's kitchen table. Then state-level animal welfare organizations. Once the story breaks, more witnesses will come forward. Clary's influence won't matter if enough people start talking. Roland studied the documents, seeing the bigger picture emerge. This wasn't just about one rescued pup anymore. It was about exposing years of cruelty and corruption. The weight of it felt enormous. But looking at the loyal animal at his feet, he knew he couldn't walk away. That evening, as Roland and Claire reviewed security camera footage from neighboring businesses that had captured suspicious activities around Clary's properties, headlights swept across the windows. The pup's head snapped up, ears forward. A crash from the back of the house sent them both running. The kitchen window was shattered, and smoke began filling the room. A Molotov cocktail blazed on the linoleum floor. "Get out!" Roland shouted, pushing Claire toward the front door. The pup barked frantically as more bottles crashed through windows. Flames licked up the walls with frightening speed. Roland grabbed Claire's research and medical records, stuffing them into her bag as smoke filled his lungs. The pup refused to leave his side, herding them both toward safety. They barely made it onto the front lawn before the house was engulfed. Standing in the cold night air, watching his home burn, Roland felt a strange calm settle over him. Claire gripped his hand, tears streaming down her face, but her voice was steady. "They're scared, Roland. They wouldn't do this if we weren't close to exposing them." The pup pressed against Roland's legs, no longer the frightened creature from the shelter. In the red glow of the flames, Roland saw strength in those eyes. The same strength he'd need to see this through. "Vernon Clary thinks he can burn away the evidence," Roland said, his voice rough from smoke. "But he can't burn away the truth. We're not stopping until everyone knows what he's done." Fire trucks wailed in the distance as Roland held the pup close, watching his home crumble. He'd lost everything, except what mattered most. He had the truth, he had loyal allies, and he had a cause worth fighting for. Vernon Clary had just made his biggest mistake. He'd shown how desperate he was to keep his secrets hidden. As emergency vehicles pulled up and neighbors gathered to watch, Roland, Claire, and the pup stood their ground. The fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. And this time, they were ready. Roland and Claire sat in the stark, fluorescent light of the sheriff's office, a thick folder of evidence spread across the deputy's desk. The pup lay quietly at Roland's feet, a far cry from the frightened creature they'd rescued months ago. Through the window, Roland could see Vernon Clary's influence everywhere, from the new patrol cars bearing his ranch's logo as a sponsor to the framed photo of him shaking hands with the sheriff at last year's county fair. "These are serious accusations," Deputy Matthews said, flipping through Claire's meticulous documentation. His expression remained carefully neutral, but his fingers drummed nervously on the desk. "Mr. Clary is a respected member of this community." "Respected doesn't mean innocent," Claire countered, pulling out more photographs. "These injuries aren't accidents. Look at the pattern of scarring, the deliberate marks. Every vet in the county has seen similar cases, but everyone's been too afraid to connect the dots." The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "We can't just raid someone's property based on circumstantial evidence." "Circumstantial?" Roland's voice was quiet but firm. "We have witness statements from former employees, satellite images showing hidden structures on his land, medical records proving systematic abuse, and this—" He placed the tracking device they'd found on the pup on the deputy's desk. "How many other pets have disappeared in this county? How many ended up in his fighting rings?" Matthews picked up the tracker, turning it over in his hands. "Look, I understand your concerns, but Mr. Clary has friends in high places. The department can't risk—" "Can't risk what?" Roland leaned forward. "Can't risk doing your job? My house was burned down. People could have died. How many more crimes are you willing to ignore?" The pup sensed Roland's tension and pressed closer to his leg. Claire placed a steadying hand on Roland's arm, but her eyes remained fixed on the deputy. "We're not leaving until you take action. If you won't, we'll go to state authorities, the media, anyone who'll listen." Hours passed in that office. Other deputies drifted in and out, examining the evidence. Phone calls were made in hushed voices. Roland could feel the weight of Vernon's influence pressing down on them all, but he refused to back down. The pup stayed alert beside him, as if understanding the importance of this moment. Finally, as evening approached, Deputy Matthews returned with the sheriff himself. Sheriff Wilson looked tired, his face lined with worry as he reviewed the files again. "You understand what you're asking?" the sheriff said. "Vernon Clary employs half the county. His donations keep our schools open, our roads paved. And that gives him the right to run a criminal empire?" Claire challenged. "To torture animals? To threaten people who stand up to him?" The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "It doesn't." What followed was a flurry of activity. Search warrants were drawn up, carefully worded to limit their scope. Roland watched as deputies gathered in the briefing room, strapping on tactical gear. The raid would target only specific outbuildings on Clary's property, areas where satellite imagery had shown suspicious activity. "We'll need you both to stay here," Matthews told them. "If we find anything, we'll need your statements." Hours crawled by as Roland and Claire waited. The pup dozed fitfully, occasionally lifting his head at sounds from the dispatch radio. Shortly after midnight, the first reports came in. "Multiple dogs recovered," crackled the radio. "Evidence of fighting rings. Medical supplies consistent with witness statements." Relief flooded through Roland. Claire gripped his hand, tears in her eyes. It wasn't a complete victory. They'd only scratched the surface of Vernon's operation, but it was a start. For the first time, the wall of silence was cracking. The next morning's paper carried the story on its front page. Local ranch raided in animal cruelty investigation. The article was carefully worded, but the implications were clear. More importantly, people began to talk. Other pet owners came forward with stories of missing animals. Former ranch hands shared what they'd seen. The tide of fear that had protected Vernon for so long began to turn. Roland knew it wasn't over. Vernon's main operations remained untouched, and his influence still ran deep. But something had changed. People were watching now. The truth was coming to light. At the shelter where it had all begun, Roland saw the impact firsthand. The staff who had once warned him away now asked for his help with other troubled animals. Claire's veterinary practice became a safe haven for people to report suspicious activities. The pup, once labeled as dangerous, became a symbol of resilience and recovery. "We've opened the door," Claire told him one evening as they reviewed new witness statements. "There's no closing it now." Roland nodded, watching the pup sleep peacefully nearby. This small victory had cost him his home, his safety, and nearly his life. But looking at the animal he'd saved, seeing the chain of events that one act of kindness had set in motion, he knew it was worth it. The local news began running features on animal abuse cases. Anonymous tips flowed into the sheriff's office. Each day brought new evidence, new witnesses willing to speak. Vernon's empire of cruelty was being exposed piece by piece, but even as Roland allowed himself to hope, he remained vigilant. Vernon's public face showed only mild concern over the investigation. But Roland had seen the rage in his eyes at a chance encounter in town. The man wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Late one night, as Roland reviewed security footage with Deputy Matthews, the officer voiced what many were thinking. "You've started something here, Pike. Something bigger than just animal abuse. There are people in this county who've been waiting years for someone to stand up to Vernon." Roland understood. This wasn't just about dogs anymore. It was about power, about one man's ability to bend an entire community to his will through fear and money. The raid had shown people that Vernon wasn't untouchable. That truth was more dangerous to him than any evidence they'd uncovered. Claire worked tirelessly, coordinating with animal welfare organizations and documenting every new case that came in. Her small veterinary office became a hub of activity, with volunteers helping to care for rescued animals and compile evidence. "We need to be careful," she warned Roland one evening. "Vernon's going to hit back hard. He has too much to lose not to." Roland knew she was right. The pup's behavior had changed too, more alert, more protective. Animals sensed danger before humans did, and Roland had learned to trust those instincts. But they couldn't stop now. The evidence they'd gathered painted a picture of corruption that went beyond animal fighting. There were financial records suggesting money laundering, connections to organized crime in neighboring states, and hints of other illegal operations hidden behind the facade of Vernon's legitimate businesses. The sheriff's office, once reluctant to act, now assigned a full-time detective to the case. Surveillance photos showed unusual activity at Vernon's other properties. Federal agencies began to take notice. Roland kept pushing, knowing that each small victory brought them closer to exposing the full truth. The pup stayed by his side, a constant reminder of why this fight mattered. Claire's support never wavered, her medical expertise and detailed records providing the backbone of their case. They were making progress, slow but steady. But Roland couldn't shake the feeling that Vernon was watching, waiting, planning his response. The man had too much power, too many resources to simply accept defeat. As Roland left the sheriff's office that evening, the pup walking alertly beside him, he knew they'd crossed a line. There was no going back now. Justice was within reach, but the price might be higher than any of them had imagined. Deputy Matthews called out as Roland reached his car. "Watch your back, Pike. We've rattled some big cages here." Roland nodded, understanding the warning. The raid had been a victory, but Vernon Clary was a man used to winning. The real battle was just beginning. The autumn leaves crunched beneath Roland's boots as he and Claire made their way through the wooded trail behind his temporary rental house. After the fire had destroyed his home, he'd found a small place on the outskirts of town. The pup trotted ahead, its nose to the ground, more confident now than ever before. "The district attorney seemed interested in the photos," Claire said, pulling her jacket tighter against the morning chill. "Maybe things are finally turning around." Roland nodded, though worry lines creased his forehead. "Vernon's been too quiet. That's what concerns me." The pup suddenly stopped, its ears pricking forward. A low growl rumbled in its chest. "What is it, boy?" Roland asked, but before he could move closer, figures emerged from behind the trees. 5 men, dressed in dark clothes, spread out in a semicircle around them. Roland recognized 2 of them from the night his house burned down. "Well, well," a gravelly voice called out. "Vernon said you'd be taking your morning walk." The speaker, a burly man with a scarred face, pulled out a heavy wrench from his jacket. "Time to teach you what happens to folks who don't mind their own business." Claire grabbed Roland's arm. "Run!" But it was too late. The men rushed forward, and Roland barely had time to push Claire behind him before the first attacker swung. He blocked the blow with his forearm, pain shooting through the bone, but managed to land a solid punch that sent the man staggering. 2 more attackers grabbed Roland's shoulders, trying to force him to the ground. He fought back desperately, but they had the advantage of numbers. A fist connected with his ribs, driving the air from his lungs. Claire screamed and swung her backpack at one of the men, catching him in the face. "Leave him alone." The pup, which had been circling anxiously, suddenly launched into action. With shocking speed, it leaped at the man holding Roland's right arm. Powerful jaws clamped down on the attacker's wrist, not with killing force, but with enough pressure to make him howl and release his grip. "Get that damn dog!" someone shouted. But the pup was transformed. No longer the frightened creature from the shelter, it moved with purpose and precision. It darted between attackers, snapping and growling, creating chaos in their ranks. When one man tried to grab its collar, the pup twisted away and knocked him off balance, sending him sprawling into the underbrush. Roland used the distraction to break free, throwing his weight into a punch that dropped another attacker. Claire had managed to put a tree between herself and the man pursuing her, but she was running out of room to maneuver. The fight had turned into a desperate scramble. Roland's breath came in ragged gasps, his muscles burning. The pup stayed close to him now, its hackles raised, positioning itself between Roland and any attacker who came near. The loyalty of this once feared animal struck Roland deep in his heart, giving him renewed strength. A sharp whistle cut through the air, followed by the sound of approaching vehicles. Flashlights' beams swept through the trees, and authoritative voices called out, "Police! Everyone freeze!" The attackers scattered like startled deer, crashing through the undergrowth. 2 deputies emerged from the tree line, weapons drawn, while more police vehicles could be heard arriving on the main road. Roland sagged against a tree, his body aching. The pup pressed against his leg, still alert but calmer now. Claire rushed to his side, her hands shaking as she checked his injuries. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm fine," Roland managed, though his ribs screamed in protest. "You?" "Just scared." She wrapped her arms around him, and he could feel her heart racing. "If the pup hadn't—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The deputies secured the scene, calling for medical assistance and taking statements. One of Vernon's men had been caught, the one the pup had originally attacked. He sat in handcuffs, nursing his wrist and glaring at Roland. As paramedics checked them over, Roland kept one hand on the pup's head, scratching behind its ears. The animal that everyone had feared, the one marked "Do Not Adopt," had fought not with the savage violence of its fighting ring days, but with controlled protective instinct. It had defended its family. "You saved us, boy," Roland murmured. The pup looked up at him with clear, steady eyes, so different from the frightened gaze he'd first seen at the shelter. "You're a good dog. The best." Sheriff Matthews arrived personally, his face grim as he surveyed the scene. "This is getting out of hand, Roland." "Vernon's desperate now. He knows we're closing in, but he's not going down without a fight." Roland nodded, watching as crime scene technicians photographed evidence, dropped weapons, boot prints, blood spots on leaves. "He won't stop," Roland said quietly. "Not until either he's finished or I am." Claire gripped his hand. "We're not backing down. Not after coming this far." The pup sat at attention between them, its posture alert but calm. It was no longer the victim of its past, but a protector, a guardian. The transformation brought tears to Roland's eyes, not just for the dog's journey, but for his own. He had started this fight to save one abandoned puppy, and now that same animal had saved him. Deputy Wilson approached with a notebook. "We'll need detailed statements, and we've got the one suspect in custody. This could be the break we needed to build a solid case against Vernon." Roland looked down at his faithful companion, then out at the woods where Vernon's men had vanished. The morning sun filtered through the autumn leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. They were alive. They had evidence. And most importantly, they had each other. But Roland knew this was just another battle in their ongoing war. Vernon would be planning his next move, probably something even more desperate and dangerous. As if reading his thoughts, the pup pressed closer to his side. Its message was clear. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Roland squared his shoulders, ignoring the pain from his injuries. Vernon might have money and influence, but Roland had something stronger: truth, loyalty, and a once broken creature that had found its courage and strength through love. The paramedics insisted on taking them to the hospital for proper examination. As they walked back toward the road, Roland kept his hand on the pup's collar, drawing comfort from its solid presence. The morning's attack had changed something fundamental in their relationship. The pup had proved itself not just rehabilitated, but heroic, and Roland felt a fierce pride that almost overwhelmed him. "We'll need to be more careful," Claire said as they reached the ambulance. "Vernon's shown he's willing to do anything." Roland helped the pup into the back of the ambulance before climbing in himself. "We'll be ready," he said, his voice firm with resolve. The pup settled at his feet, alert and protective, a guardian instead of a victim. The transformation was complete, but the fight was far from over. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Roland's driveway as Vernon's expensive black truck pulled up. Roland stood on his front porch, the pup alert at his side, while Claire watched from just inside the doorway. They had been expecting this, Vernon's final desperate move. Vernon stepped out, his boots crunching on gravel. His usual polished appearance was gone, replaced by a wild look in his eyes. "You should have left well enough alone, Pike," he snarled, advancing toward the porch. "Some things aren't meant to be fixed." Roland held his ground. "Like your dogfighting ring? Or the way you've been buying off officials to look the other way?" "You're nothing," Vernon spat, his face reddening. "A factory worker who couldn't mind his own business. That mutt was mine, part of my operation. You had no right." The pup growled low, its muscles tensing. Roland felt a calm certainty settle over him. "Every living thing has a right to be safe, to be loved. Something you wouldn't understand." Vernon lunged forward, pulling a hunting knife from his belt. The pup barked sharply, but stayed beside Roland, showing remarkable control. Claire gasped from the doorway, already reaching for her phone to call for help. "You've cost me everything!" Vernon raged, slashing the air between them. "My reputation, my business deals, my control over this county. And for what? A worthless dog?" Roland stepped forward, keeping himself between Vernon and the house where Claire stood. "That worthless dog showed more courage and loyalty than you ever will. You're finished, Vernon. The police are already on their way." Vernon's face twisted with fury. He charged up the porch steps, knife extended. Roland moved to meet him, but the pup was faster. It launched forward, not with blind aggression, but with precise defensive instinct. Its powerful jaws clamped around Vernon's wrist, forcing him to drop the knife. Roland tackled Vernon, both men crashing onto the porch boards. They struggled fiercely, Vernon's desperate strength against Roland's determined protection of all he held dear. The pup maintained its hold, not savage, but controlled, keeping Vernon from reaching for the fallen knife. Claire's voice rang out. "Police are 2 minutes out, Vernon. It's over." Vernon thrashed wildly, managing to land a solid punch to Roland's jaw, but Roland held firm, using his weight to pin the larger man down. The pup released its grip and stood guard, a low growl rumbling in its chest. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Vernon's struggles became more frantic. "You don't understand what you've done," he gasped. "The people I know, the connections I have." "We understand perfectly," Roland said, tightening his hold. "That's why we gathered every piece of evidence. Every document, every witness statement, every medical record showing what you did to these animals. It's all gone to the state authorities. Even your friends can't help you now." The police cars roared into the driveway, lights flashing. Officers poured out, weapons drawn. "On the ground! Hands where we can see them!" Roland rolled away from Vernon, who lay panting on the porch. The pup immediately moved to Roland's side, positioning itself between him and Vernon. Claire rushed forward to help Roland up, her hands gentle on his bruised face. Vernon was handcuffed and read his rights. As officers led him to a patrol car, he looked back at Roland with pure hatred. But his power was gone, stripped away by the truth Roland had fought so hard to expose. State police investigators arrived shortly after, confirming that Vernon's entire operation was being dismantled. His political connections were scrambling to distance themselves, and his financial records were being scrutinized for evidence of corruption. As the law enforcement vehicles began to clear out, Roland sat on his porch steps, exhausted but at peace. Claire settled beside him, taking his hand in hers. The pup lay at their feet, finally relaxed, its mission of protection complete. "You did it," Claire said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You saw something worth saving when everyone else saw danger. You never gave up." Roland squeezed her hand, looking down at the pup. No longer the frightened, scarred creature from the shelter, but a strong, loyal companion. "We did it together, all of us." He turned to Claire, seeing in her eyes the same love and understanding that had drawn them close through this struggle. "Thank you for believing in us." Claire's smile was radiant as she leaned in to kiss him gently. The pup wagged its tail, sensing the joy of the moment. Where once Roland's life had been empty and alone, now it was filled with purpose, love, and the unshakable bond of loyalty. The evening sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, a fitting end to their long battle. Vernon's reign of cruelty was over, brought down not by force but by the very things he had dismissed: compassion, perseverance, and the transformative power of love. Roland looked at his unlikely family, the brave pup that had found its strength through trust, and the remarkable woman who had stood by him through every challenge they face. Where others had seen a curse, he had found a blessing. In saving the pup, he had saved himself, and discovered a love that would light his way forward. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.